Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. First I want to extend my apologies for the poor sound in the first video. When I started working on the record amplifier board of the Revox a77 Mark IV, I initially wanted to show members how to remove the capacitors. It's quite simple really. What I've done is use some fresh solder on each of the solder pads to prepare them, and then desolder them step by step by either using a solder sucker. That's one of these. They're quite handy to have. You can see that. Yeah. So. But they're not really necessary. They're good to clean up the solder pads, but just be gentle with the soldering iron. If you use a really hot iron, just be sure to avoid delaying or prolonging the contact between the iron tip and the pads, because they're delicate and they can break and cause you all sorts of problems later on. So what we're going to do now is just have a good look at the board. You'll notice the board has been cleaned up, the solder pads, and you can see the holes nice and clearly through. I've purposely arranged for a light to be there so you could actually see the board. And yeah, there you go. We can see where the solder pads have been cleaned up nicely there. So it'll be a pleasure to work with the board, I think. Okay, so the next step of the journey is I've decided to organize my capacitors so that there's no or little chance of putting the incorrect capacitor onto the board. So we have 3.3 microfarad capacitors there and there, okay? And we also have another tantalum capacitor here and there. So we have 3.3 tantalums, and we have a 4 microfarad tantalum as well as a 1 microfarad tantalum. So we have them organized here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you briefly what I did with one of the capacitors. So connected to a Atlas. I'm not advertising for anybody, but in case you want to get one, they're quite reasonable and they're handy to have. It's a peak electronic capacitance and resistance meter. So checking for the replacement of the 22 microfarad capacitor that goes in that spot. Yep. We can see it's measures 25 microfarads on the meter. I'll just arrange the camera for you to see better. So there we can see on the capacitance meter, it's 25 microfarads. It's a bit dark, but okay. Let's say 25. Sorry, 22.52 microfarad capacitor. So we have a 100 microfarad Freco capacitor that we're removing from the board, and we'll be replacing it with the 100 microfarad electrolytic. And there you see you have a 93.3 microfarad cap, which is within spec, okay? So we won't waste your time going through all of the capacitors with this process. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start populating the board, and just quickly to show you the order of where the capacitors are going to be placed. So at C501 and 510, That's C501 and C510. We have 3.3 microfarad tantalums. I'm putting 3.3 microfarad electrolytic in there. At 502, which is a electrolytic, that's the 100 microfarad that goes in there. And at 507, that's it, we'll have the 22 microfarad capacitor electrolytic going in there. Okay, so the 507 goes there, against closer to the resistor. And then we have the 509, which is the third electrolytic, which will be replacing the film capacitor. We'll put it in there. 511 will be a 1 microfarad tantalum, which we replace with the 1 microfarad electrolytic. That's 515, 512. So 512 will be in that spot there. C515 is a 3.3 microfarad tantalum. We'll be replacing with a 3.3 microfarad electrolytic, and that will be here, 515. So there you go. So I'll start populating the board and probably get back to you when I've completed that, and then we'll move on to the next stage of the project. Catch you later.